Click, click, click. That was the sound of my heels striking the cold stone floor of Grace Community Church. Every step I took echoed like a judge's gavel handing down a sentence. The entire congregation, drowning in fake sniffles just moments before, suddenly went dead silent. The Reverend dropped his Bible. And my two children, Michael and Chloe, their faces drained of all color. Who were they looking at? A ghost? No. They were looking at the mother for whom they had just held a memorial service in absentia. The mother they had declared dead just to steal 12 acres of inherited land. I am Margaret Sullivan, and I have returned from the dead not to mourn, but to demand justice. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be shared, even if they shake your faith in humanity. There are stories that, no matter how painful, simply must be told. It was on a Wednesday with Strong Sunday. I had just returned from Birmingham, where I went to visit my childhood friend Helen, who has weak bones and needed company. I came back a week earlier than planned because I felt an agony in my chest, the kind you feel when something isn't right. I took the Greyhound bus while it was still dark and arrived at the Clayton bus station around 10 inches the morning. I hadn't even told anyone I was coming back early. I wanted it to be a surprise. And what a surprise I got. I had barely stepped off the bus with my little leather suitcase when I bumped into Patricia, my neighbor of over 30 years. The poor woman almost fell over backwards. She turned as white as a sheet, her mouth open like a fish out of water, eyes wider than car headlights. "Margaret, is that really you?" She stammered, hand on her chest, like someone feeling their heart trying to jump out. "But you, didn't you die?" I thought the old lady had lost her mind for good. "What kind of story is that, Patricia? Are you confusing me with another dead person? I'm more alive than a plant after the rain." It was then that Patricia told me, shaking like a leaf, that all of Clayton was mourning my passing. According to the gossip running through town, I had suffered a massive stroke up there in Birmingham. You know how small towns are, honey. Gossip moves faster than a tornado in a trailer park, and people love a tragedy so much they forget to ask for proof. Plus, with a closed casket, nobody could see there was no body inside. Poor thing, died far from home, without any family nearby. There was even talk of a morgue where my body supposedly was, the name of a funeral director, everything in minute detail. And the most impressive part, my children, Michael and Chloe, had already held the viewing closed casket, of course, because the body arrived in a state that couldn't be shown. And that very afternoon, at 5 o'clock, the memorial service was going to happen at the main church. I felt my blood boil in my veins and dizziness hit my head. I had to sit on a bench at the station so I wouldn't fall right there. "You mean to tell me I'm dead and didn't even know it?" I said, trying to understand all that madness. Patricia, still astonished, offered me water and told me more details. While I drank the water with trembling hands, I heard that, according to the official rumor, I had been buried in a cemetery in Birmingham itself because of the advanced decomposition of the body. What a bald-faced lie. The only thing decomposed in this story was the character of my two children. "And what else have Michael and Chloe been saying around here, Patricia?" I asked, already imagining the size of the scheme. That was when the bomb dropped. As soon as I died, they had already put my land up for sale. That land my Uncle Arthur left me, which sits at the edge of town, and is worth a fortune today because of the urban expansion. And not only that, they were already emptying my house, taking furniture, ceramics, everything I had built over decades of hard work. I didn't stand up immediately. I couldn't. It felt as if my legs had turned to water and my lungs had forgotten how to draw air. For a long moment, I sat there on that wooden bench, staring at a crack in the pavement, feeling a tear slide down my cheek, not from anger, but from a grief so profound it felt like physical agony. My babies, the children I had bathed, fed, and prayed for. They hadn't just killed me on paper, they had erased my entire existence for a plot of dirt. Have you ever felt a pain so sharp it pins you to the bench, making you question every lullaby you ever sang to your babies? If you have, tell me in the comments, because I wouldn't wish this heartbreak on my worst enemy. I wanted to curl up and truly die right there. But then, a strange heat began to rise in my chest. It started as a flicker, a tiny spark of the old Margaret, the woman who survived fever and poverty. I wiped the tear with a trembling hand. I wasn't going home to cry. If I was dead to them, I was going to stay dead. Just long enough to show them what a resurrection really looks like. I asked Patricia not to tell anyone she had seen me. Let me make my own appearance. She agreed, still shaking, and took me to her house so I could rest until the time of the service. The rest of that day was the longest of my life. Sitting in Patricia's kitchen, I drank coffee after coffee while my head buzzed with thoughts. How could my children, the ones I carried in my belly for months, nursed, raised alone after Walter died in the mine, for whom I sold the few jewels I had to pay for private school, the same ones I taught to distinguish right from wrong, whom I raised to be decent people, how could they declare me dead, bury me in their minds, all for money and land? At 4:30 inches the afternoon, I got ready with care. I put on my beige Sunday dress, combed my gray hair, put on a light lipstick. No corpse looks this good. Patricia tried to convince me not to go, saying it could be dangerous, that the shock might be too big, but I was decided. If they killed me, Patricia, now they're going to have to face me resurrected. The walk to the church never seemed so short. With every step I took, determination grew inside me. I arrived just as the service had started. Reverend Thomas, who had known me since he was a boy, was at the pulpit talking about Sister Margaret, so dedicated to the community, a ceramicist with blessed hands. From where I was, I could see my children in the front pew, Michael in a dark suit, and Chloe all in black, both with their heads down, faking a grief they didn't feel. The rest of the church was full neighbors, friends, acquaintances, all lamenting my untimely departure. I took a deep breath, gripped the handle of my purse firmly, and pushed the church doors open. That old leather strap was the only thing keeping my shaking hands steady. I knew once I opened those doors, there was no going back. I was about to become the ghost they feared most. The creaking of the old wood announced my arrival before they even saw me. First, only the people in the back noticed. I heard stifled gasps, saw eyes wide open, hands covering mouths. Then, like a wave, the shock spread through the pews until it reached the front, where my children still hadn't noticed anything, concentrated on their performance of mourning. I walked down the center aisle, but I didn't feel my feet touching the floor. I felt like I was floating through a nightmare. I looked at the back of their heads, Michael's expensive haircut, Chloe's perfectly styled bun. I saw Chloe dab a handkerchief to dry eyes, a performance worthy of an Oscar. That simple gesture broke me more than the death certificate ever could. She wasn't mourning me. She was mourning the time she had to waste pretending. Click, click, click. My low-heeled shoes sounded like a judge's gavel handing down a sentence. But the judge wasn't me. The sound of those heels on the church floor must have sounded like thunder to her children. It takes incredible courage to walk down that aisle, knowing you're about to shatter your family's facade forever. Watch closely as the house of lies begins to crumble right in front of the whole town. It was God, and I was just his witness. Reverend Thomas was the first at the front to see me. The poor man went so pale I thought he was going to faint right there. The Bible he was holding slipped through his trembling fingers and hit the pulpit with a dull thud. He stopped mid-sentence, mouth open in shock. It was this sudden silence that made my children finally raise their heads. Oh, my good Lord. The look on Michael and Chloe's faces at that moment was worth more than all the gold in the world. Michael turned the color of candle wax, eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Chloe let out a high-pitched scream and grabbed her brother's arm, as if she had seen the devil himself. They tried to hide behind some relatives who were nearby, but there was nowhere to hide. The whole church was already standing. A growing buzz of astonishment and confusion took over the sacred space. I stopped right in front of the altar, about 3 steps from my children, and spoke with the strongest voice my raspy throat allowed. Well then, it seems the news of my death was somewhat exaggerated. Nobody laughed at my attempt at a joke. Everyone was paralyzed, looking at me as if I were a supernatural apparition. Can someone explain to me why I am attending my own memorial service? Michael, Chloe, do you have something to say to your mother who died in Birmingham? The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It was Reverend Thomas who finally managed to speak, his voice trembling. "Margaret, is it really you?" "Praise God. It's a miracle." "No miracle, Reverend. What we have here is a crime. My own children declared me dead while I was visiting a friend in Birmingham. They invented a stroke story, held a viewing with a closed casket. I just want to know what was inside that box. All this to get their hands on my land and my house. Or are you going to deny it?" I pointed my finger directly at my children, who seemed glued to the floor, unable to move or speak. It was then that the church turned into pandemonium. People screaming, making the sign of the cross, some crying with joy seeing I was alive, others shocked by the revelation. Michael tried to stammer some excuse. "Mom, you don't understand," we thought. There was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? You had planned everything down to the smallest detail. You even got a falsified death certificate, as I found out later. Don't underestimate what a desperate lawyer with gambling buddies can do. A few favors called in at the county morgue, a corrupt clerk, and suddenly, a living woman is legally dead. It's scary how easy it is when you have no conscience. Chloe, always more temperamental than her brother, tried a different approach. She advanced toward me with anger in her eyes. "What are you doing here? You weren't supposed to come back yet." In the confusion of the moment, she let the truth slip out. I wasn't supposed to be back. I was supposed to be in Birmingham for another week. Enough time for them to close the sale of my properties. Enough time to erase my existence and take everything I had built. "So you admit it? You planned all this?" I shouted, feeling hot tears running down my face. They weren't tears of sadness. They were of indignation. "You killed your own mother on paper for money. What kind of children did I raise?" Reverend Thomas, recovering his composure a bit, tried to calm the situation. "Brethren, let us all calm down. This is a serious matter that needs to be resolved, but perhaps not in the Lord's temple." But I wasn't willing to shut up, not after being buried by my own children. "No, Reverend, everyone needs to hear this. It isn't about the land. It isn't about the money." My voice cracked, the raspiness turning into a roar of pain. I looked straight at Michael, ignoring the gasps around me. "I would have given you the land, Michael. If you had come to me, looked me in the eye, and told me you were drowning, I would have sold every acre to save you, because that's what a mother does. But you didn't want a mother. You wanted an inheritance. You chose to bury me rather than trust me, and that is a sin no real estate deal can ever cover up. They couldn't wait for me to die for real, could they? It had to be now." The crowd in the church reacted with horror. Clayton is a small town. Everyone knows everyone. And seeing a mother betrayed this way by her children was too shocking. Some people started backing away from Michael and Chloe as if they had a contagious disease. Others shouted words of condemnation. My children, seeing they were cornered, tried to flee through the side of the church, but were blocked by some men standing in the way. At that moment, I noticed the presence of a man in a suit who wasn't from town. He was sitting discreetly in one of the back pews, observing everything with professional interest. I learned later he was a representative from the real estate firm in Birmingham who had come to close the deal on buying my land. Land that, according to the papers my children forged, now belonged to them by right of inheritance. Inheritance from a woman who was very much alive. And it wasn't just the land. No, I continued, letting all the hurt and anger out. They already started emptying my house too. Those ceramics I made all my life, the furniture I bought with such sacrifice, the memories of your father, everything being sold or taken away as if I were a speck of dust the wind blew away. I saw recognition in the eyes of some present. Some people had bought or seen my items for sale in the last few days, ceramic pieces everyone knew were mine, made with these hands calloused by clay over decades. Shame took over my children's faces. Not shame of regret, but of having been caught red-handed. Reverend Thomas, seeing the situation could get out of control, tried again to restore order. "Please, let's all calm down. Mrs. Sullivan, thank God you are alive and well. That is the most important thing. As for the rest, the competent authorities can be called to investigate these grave accusations." "Not accusations, Reverend. Facts," I corrected, still trembling with indignation. "And you can believe I will go to the ends of the earth." My own children tried to erase my existence with a pen stroke. If that isn't a crime, I don't know what is anymore. With that, my eyes crossed with Sheriff Miller, the retired sheriff, who was also in the church. He gave a discreet nod, as if saying, "Leave it to me." It was a small gesture that gave me the strength to keep standing there, facing what was perhaps the hardest moment of my life. Michael, always the calculator, finally managed to articulate a defense. "Folks, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We received news that Mom had suffered a stroke in Birmingham. We were devastated. Someone tricked us, gave us wrong information." "Bold-faced lie," I interrupted, taking another step toward him. "Who would have reported me dead? Who would have details about a stroke that never happened? And by coincidence, you were already selling my things? You already had documents ready to transfer the land? Explain that to me, son." That was when Chloe made the fatal mistake. She was always the hothead, the one who couldn't hold her tongue. "And what did you want us to do? Keep waiting for you to decide to sell that land? You were never going to sell, always with that story of sentimental value that it was Uncle Arthur's legacy. Meanwhile, we needed the money." Shock ran through the church like an electric current. She had confessed everything right there in front of God and the whole community of Clayton. Michael looked at his sister like he could kill her right there. Even he, with all his manipulative talk, couldn't fix that. "Needing money for what, Chloe? To pay your brother's gambling debts, or for your spending with that gold-digger boyfriend you found? You both have jobs, you have health, you have an education I paid for with the sweat of my brow. What else did you want from me?" The revelation about Michael's gambling debts caused another buzz in the church. It wasn't a secret to some that my son had been frequenting poker tables in neighboring towns, but few knew the size of the problem. As for Chloe's boyfriend, he was a guy from Birmingham who only showed up when he needed cash. I had warned my daughter several times, but she always accused me of being old-fashioned, of not understanding modern love. "You never understood anything anyway," screamed Chloe, completely losing control. "Always thinking you know what's best for everyone with your outdated ideas. That land sitting there, yielding nothing, while we could have a better life. Better life? At the cost of your own mother's death?" The voice that thundered wasn't mine, but Mrs. Higgins, the old midwife of the town who helped bring my 2 children into the world. She stood up from her pew, her body small but her presence immense. "I put you 2 in this woman's arms. I saw the look of love when she held each of you for the first time. And this is how you thank her? Declaring her dead to steal what's hers? Shame on you." Mrs. Higgins' words seemed to awaken something in the church. Suddenly, it wasn't just my indignation. It was the collective indignation of a community that valued respecting parents and honesty. I saw several men approaching my children menacingly, faces twisted in anger. For a moment, I feared for their physical safety. "Nobody is going to take justice into their own hands here," declared Reverend Thomas, stepping between the crowd and my children. "This is a matter for the authorities. Mrs. Sullivan is alive, thank God, and can seek her rights legally." That was when the man from the real estate company, who had watched everything in silence, finally spoke up. He approached the front and spoke in a professional tone. "Mrs. Margaret Sullivan? I am David Anderson, representing Horizon Developers. I was here to finalize the purchase of your land with your heirs, but I see there was an attempted fraud here. You can be sure our company does not condone this type of behavior. We will cooperate fully with any investigation." At that moment, I felt my legs go weak. It was too much for a woman my age to bear all that emotion, the shock of betrayal, the public confrontation. Mrs. Higgins noticed and quickly came to support me, helping me sit in one of the front pews. "Calm down, Margaret. Breathe deep. It's all okay now. You're alive and that's what matters." While I caught my breath, I saw Sheriff Miller approach my children. Even though he wasn't the official sheriff anymore, he still carried the authority of decades enforcing the law in Clayton. "Michael, Chloe, I think you 2 better come with me to the station. Let's file a report and clear this whole situation up. What you did constitutes several crimes, and you know that." My children didn't resist. Maybe because they knew they were cornered. Maybe because shame had finally penetrated their hardened consciences. I watched as they were led out of the church, escorted by Sheriff Miller and 2 other trusted men. The crowd parted to let them through, some spitting on the ground in a sign of contempt, others shaking their heads in silent disapproval. Reverend Thomas, visibly shaken by it all, tried to find words to conclude what was certainly the most unusual service of his religious career. Brothers and sisters, I think we can say we witnessed something extraordinary today. Not a miracle of resurrection as we initially thought, but a miracle of another nature, the triumph of truth over lies. Let us thank God for the life of our dear Margaret and pray that justice is done, but also that forgiveness finds space in wounded hearts. As people approached to hug me, to welcome me back to the world of the living, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Relief for discovering the plot in time, indignation at the betrayal, shame for having raised children capable of such wickedness, and a deep sadness, the kind that seems to have no bottom. I had recovered my life, yes, but I had lost something that was perhaps even more precious. Trust in the fruit of my womb. When I finally managed to leave the church, supported by Mrs. Higgins and other friends, the sun was already setting over Clayton, a blood-red sunset, as if the sky itself was indignant at what had happened there. I looked at that burning sky and made a silent promise. That would not be the last word of my story. I, Margaret Sullivan, had resurrected, not only to reclaim what was rightfully mine, but to build a new life, a life where the clay I molded with my hands would be a metaphor for my own rebirth. But hold on, before going straight to the end, I have to start this story from the beginning of my life. Otherwise, you won't understand properly how I ended up in that church, in a beige dress, interrupting my own memorial service. I was born in Clayton, Alabama, on a hot morning in October 1946. My father, Harold Sullivan, was a potter, one of those everyone in the region sought out when they needed work well done. We weren't rich, Lord no, but we didn't go hungry either. Our house was near the creek where he dug the clay that turned into pots, jugs, vases, and everything else you can imagine. I remember like it was today the smell of that wet clay that permeated our house. It was a smell of living earth, as my father used to say. In my family, clay wasn't just work material, it was almost religion. Daddy said God made man from clay, and every time he molded a piece, he was in a way imitating the Creator's work. Every pot that leaves our hands, Maggie, takes a little piece of our soul, he would say with those thick, calloused hands that had the delicacy of a lace maker when they worked the clay. I started learning the trade at 7 years old. Daddy put me on a wooden stool in front of the kick wheel he had built himself and guided my small, clumsy hands. Feel the clay, my daughter. It will tell you what it wants to become. At first, my pieces looked more like deformed balls than anything else. But Daddy never got discouraged. The clay teaches patience, he repeated every time I cried in frustration for not doing it right. It was around that time I caught that bad fever that almost took me to the other side. 38 days burning up, delirious to the point neighbors were already preparing for my child funeral. My mother, Mary, a perfect name for a woman who suffered so much in life, prayed to the good Lord constantly. Barefoot, walking, fasting for 3 days. She did everything she could and then some, and it worked, thank God. The fever broke. I started eating again, but my voice was never the same. It became raspy, scratchy, as if the disease had left scars on my vocal cords. At first, that different voice made me ashamed. Other children mimicked me at school, called me talking frog, and other cruelties children know how to do so well. I cried in secret, asked God to give me back my girl voice, until one day my father called me to sit on the porch after work at the pottery shed. "My daughter," he said while lighting his pipe, "this voice God gave you isn't a punishment. It isn't a scar. It's so no one forgets who Margaret Sullivan is." And he told me that in the old days, the great storytellers of the South always had some characteristics that made them unique. A blind man who saw people's souls, a hunchback who carried the weight of the world's stories, a woman with a raspy voice who seemed to speak with the earth itself. Your voice is your strength, not your weakness. Those words changed everything for me. I started accepting my different voice, even liking it, and it was that same voice that years later would help me survive when everything seemed lost. But that's a story for later on. As I grew, my talent with clay grew too. By 12, I could make pieces Daddy approved of with a nod, which for anyone who knew old Harold was high praise. By 15, I had my pieces being sold at the market alongside his, without anyone being able to tell which was whose. And it wasn't just making pretty pieces. I had learned to feel the clay, understand its consistency, know how long to let it dry, what the right temperature of the wood-fired kiln was. It was knowledge that entered through the fingers, not the ears. It was at that same market that I met Walter. He was 22, worked in the coal mine, which was the economic heart of Clayton back then. He wasn't a handsome man in the way magazines show, but he had a presence you couldn't ignore. Tall, strong, skin-tanned by the sun, with those dark eyes that seemed to see inside you. He passed by the stall where I was helping Daddy sell our pieces, picked up a small pitcher I had decorated with raised flowers, and stood admiring it. "The girl made that," said Daddy, introducing me with pride. "My daughter, Maggie." Walter looked from the pitcher to me with a smile I'll never forget. "Blessed hands," he said, and bought the piece, paying without haggling, which was reason enough to win my father's favor. After that, Walter started showing up every week at the market. He always bought some little thing, always found a way to strike up a conversation. At first, Daddy kept an eye on him, suspicious, like every father of a single girl. But soon Walter won his trust. He was hardworking, respectful, attended the same church as us. When he finally asked permission to court me, Daddy didn't hesitate to give his blessing. The courtship lasted a year and a bit. Enough time for me to fall madly in love with that man of few words but gentle gestures. He never came home without a little gift, a hair ribbon, a sweet from town, a wildflower. He wasn't a man of grand declarations, but when he looked at me that way, it was like the whole world fit in his eyes. I married at 17. The party was simple but beautiful in the church's fellowship hall. Mama cried the whole time, torn between the joy of seeing her daughter settled and the sadness of losing her to another home. Daddy, a tough man who rarely showed emotion, hugged me tight at the farewell and whispered, "The clay of your life is in your hands now, daughter. Mold it right." We went to live in a small but airy house, not too far from the mine where Walter worked. He had saved every penny to buy that little house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. In the backyard, he built a little shed himself to be my workshop. "So you don't lose your touch with the clay," he said. That gesture filled me with love and gratitude. It's rare to find a partner who doesn't just accept your dreams but literally builds a home for them. Walter was a special man, and seeing this pure love makes the betrayal Margaret faces later sting even more. It really makes you miss the days when love was simple and honest, doesn't it? How many husbands back then encouraged their wife's work? Most expected the woman to drop everything to dedicate herself exclusively to the home. The first years of marriage were the happiest of my life. I adapted easily to the routine of a wife. I woke up early to prepare Walter's coffee before he went to the mine. I took care of the house in the morning and in the afternoon dedicated myself to pottery. At first, I made pieces just for pleasure. Then I started selling to neighbors, acquaintances, until I set up my own little stall at the weekly market. I didn't earn much, but it was a little money that helped with household expenses and gave me some independence. When we completed 2 years of marriage, I found out I was pregnant. It was a joy without measure. Walter, usually a contained man, went running down the street like a boy, telling everyone he was going to be a father. We spent months planning, dreaming, choosing names. If it was a boy, it would be Harold like my father. If it was a girl, Sarah in honor of his mother. But life has these surprises. When I was 7 months along, I had heavy bleeding. I ended up at the rural hospital serving the region. The doctor, already old and with decades of experience, managed to stabilize me and save the baby, but put me on absolute bed rest until the end of the pregnancy. Those were the 2 longest months of my life, lying in that bed, with Walter stretching himself between work at the mine and caring for me. Michael was born on a stormy morning, one of those that make the countryside bloom. A big, healthy boy, with strong lungs announcing his arrival to the world with vigor. When I put him to my breast for the first time, I felt a love I didn't know was possible to feel. It was like my heart had doubled in size to accommodate that immense feeling. Motherhood transformed me completely. The first months were adaptation, sleepless nights, the constant worry of someone holding a life so fragile and dependent. Walter helped how he could, but the work at the mine was heavy and demanding. Sometimes he came home so exhausted he could barely eat dinner before falling into bed. Even so, he always found energy to pick up little Michael, talk to him, sing those old songs he had learned from his father. When Michael turned 2, I got pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy went without scares. Chloe was born on a quiet morning, a tiny but sharp girl, with eyes that seemed to observe everything around her with infinite curiosity. 2 small children meant double the work, but also multiplied joy. Our modest little house overflowed with love and dreams. Walter worked more and more at the mine. He had been promoted to section foreman, which meant more responsibility and a slightly better salary. With the extra, we managed to buy some new furniture, add a room to the house, save a little for emergencies. On weekends, when he was off, we took the kids to play by the creek, visit grandparents, or simply play in the backyard. We were happy in our simplicity. That was when fate decided to take a cruel turn in our story. Michael was 5, and Chloe 3 when the accident happened at the mine. A collapse in one of the deepest tunnels. Walter was down there with 7 other men. Only 2 managed to get out alive, and my husband wasn't among them. I remember like it was today, the mine manager knocking on our door, hat in hand, eyes down, looking for words to break the news that would change our lives forever. The days that followed were a blur of pain, despair, and disbelief. How to explain to 2 small children that Daddy wouldn't come back? How to accept myself that that strong man, full of life and dreams, had been swallowed by the earth he challenged every day to support us. The funeral was an ordeal. Everyone wanting to help, say words of comfort, but nothing filling the void that opened in my chest. We buried Walter in the Clayton Cemetery, under an oak tree that gave shade to the grave. He always liked to rest under trees after Sunday lunch. The pain of loss was immense, but I didn't have time to give in to grief as I would have liked. I had 2 small children depending on me. The mining company paid a settlement. It wasn't much, but enough to survive for a few months while I reorganized life. My parents wanted me to move back to their house with the children, but I refused. That little house, however simple, was what remained of the life we built together. It was where Walter still lived in every corner, in every object, in every memory. I went back to working with clay with renewed intensity. It wasn't a hobby or income supplement anymore. It was our survival. I woke up at 4 a.m. to prepare the clay. I took advantage while the children were still sleeping to get ahead on work. I made pieces my father taught me, but also started creating my own style. Figures of daily life in Clayton, scenes of local nature, characters from Southern folklore. I put something of my soul into every piece, as Daddy had taught. But soon I realized that pottery alone wouldn't be enough to support the house and the boys. I started working as a housekeeper in the wealthier families' homes in town. 3 times a week I left the children with my mother and went to clean houses, wash clothes, iron, cook, whatever was needed. On Saturday nights, I even got a gig as a waitress at a simple diner downtown. It was exhausting, but every penny counted. On weekends, when I wasn't at the diner, I took my ceramics to sell at the fair. That was where I discovered a talent I didn't even know I had. Telling stories started by chance. To attract customers to my little stall, I started narrating stories while working on the portable wheel I took with me. Stories my father and grandmother told, legends of the region, tales I heard around. My raspy voice, which had been a source of shame before, was now my trademark. "Let's hear the woman with the earth voice," people would say, forming a circle around my stall. The more stories I told, the more people gathered to listen, and the more people listened, the more pieces I sold. Soon my little stall started to stand out. People came from other towns just to buy my ceramics and hear my stories. Margaret of the Clay and Stories, they called me. That modest, local fame helped me increase sales to the point where I could reduce the cleaning jobs to just 2 houses a week. Even with all this work, pottery, cleaning, diner life remained tight. When Michael turned 7 and needed to start school, I had to make difficult choices. The public school in Clayton back then was weak, with unmotivated teachers and precarious structure. I wanted something better for my children. I wanted them to have the education neither I nor Walter could have. That was when I made one of the most painful decisions of my life, selling the few jewels I had. The set of earrings and gold necklace I got for my wedding, the bracelet that was my grandmother's, Walter's wristwatch, every piece loaded with sentimental value, but at that moment worth more as an investment in my children's future. With the money, I managed to enroll both in the only private school in town. It wasn't an elite academy, but it had committed teachers and decent facilities. Seeing those jewels leave my hands was like ripping pieces of my heart out. But every time I saw Michael or Chloe coming back from school, talking excitedly about what they had learned, showing notebooks full of praise from teachers, I knew I had made the right choice. The sacrifice was worth it. Years passed, and the struggle didn't get easier, just changed shape. As the children grew, expenses increased. More expensive school supplies, clothes that wouldn't stop getting too small, medicine for childhood illnesses, extra activities the school required. I worked Sunday to Sunday, slept less than 6 hours a night. My hands were always calloused and cracked from clay, housework, the daily fight for survival, but I didn't complain. With every step my children took, every achievement at school, every smile they gave when receiving a simple gift I had sacrificed to buy, I felt I was honoring Walter's memory. He had given his life in the mine to support us. The least I could do was ensure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Michael proved to be a smart, curious boy, good with numbers. Teachers said he had the potential to be an engineer, doctor, whatever he wanted. Chloe was more artistic, taking after me and her grandfather. She had skilled hands and boundless imagination. While her brother stood out in math and science, she shined in literature, arts, manual work. They were so different from each other, but equally precious to me. I bet all my chips on them. I believed they would be my pride and comfort in old age. That was when the unexpected happened again in my life. This time, positively. My Uncle Arthur, my father's brother, lived alone on a farm on the outskirts of Clayton. Never married, had no children, lived off that land where he planted a bit of everything and raised a few head of cattle. We weren't close. He was kind of reclusive, didn't like visitors, rarely showed up at family lunches. I remember Michael and Chloe were even scared of him with that long white beard and grumpy way. When Uncle Arthur died at 80-something, it was a general surprise to discover he had left the land to me. The handwritten will, registered at the local courthouse, simply said, "I leave my land to my niece, Margaret Sullivan, the only person in the family who always treated me with true respect." I was floored. I didn't even remember doing anything special for the old man. Maybe a few visits when he was sick, a cake on his birthday, sincere invitations to Sunday lunches he almost always refused. Small gestures that for me were just family obligation, but for him, in his solitude, meant much more. The land wasn't very extensive, about 12 acres, and was in an area that at the time had no commercial value. It was far from town, without infrastructure nearby, hard to access in the rainy season. My first thought was to sell and use the money to help with the kids' education. But when I went to see the place, something touched me deeply. That piece of ground had been my uncle's refuge for decades. He had planted every tree, cared for every animal, built with his own hands the simple but cozy little house. Selling would be like erasing his existence, his memory. I decided to keep the land. I couldn't live there. It was too far from the children's school and my jobs in town. But I started going on weekends, taking the boys to know country life, tend the fruit trees, keep the little house in order. I hired a boy from the area, son of acquaintances, to watch the place during the week. It was an extra expense, but I felt it was the right thing to do. Who would have said that decision, made more by feeling than reason, would become years later the cause of the biggest betrayal of my life? At that time, no one could imagine Clayton would grow towards Uncle Arthur's land. No one predicted that the construction of a new state highway would make that previously forgotten region so valuable. No one, least of all me, thought that piece of ground would one day be coveted by developers and real estate speculators. But that's a story for later. In those times, all I wanted was to raise my children with dignity, give them the education neither Walter nor I had, and maybe see them graduate, have a better life, less suffering, less uncertain. Uncle Arthur's inheritance seemed more like a burden than a blessing, one more responsibility for someone who already had so many. My children's adolescence brought new challenges. Michael continued brilliant in his studies, but started showing a side that worried me. Excessive ambition. He wasn't content with good grades. He had to be first in the class. It wasn't enough to have decent clothes. He wanted the brands the rich merchants' kids in town wore. He started to be ashamed of our simple house, my work with clay, even my raspy country voice. "Mom, why don't you get surgery to fix that voice?" he asked me once after some classmates laughed hearing me call him at the school gate. Chloe was different. She inherited my connection with clay, spent hours helping me in the workshop. She had natural talent. Her pieces already showed her own personality, but she also had a difficult, explosive temperament. Fought at school, talked back to teachers, had fits of rage when contradicted. Just like her grandmother, my mother used to say, referring not to herself, but to my paternal grandmother. A hot-blooded woman, who they say broke a plate over her husband's head when he came home drunk once. They were hard years, balancing exhausting work, the demands of their teenage years, and worries about the future. School tuition went up every year above inflation. Books got more expensive, needs increased, demands didn't stop growing. More than once I thought about giving up, taking the boys out of private school, selling Uncle Arthur's land despite the sentimental attachment. But something inside me, stubbornness maybe, or faith, stopped me from retreating. When Michael turned 17, he came with news that would change our lives again. He wanted to go to law school in Birmingham. "Lawyers make good money, Mom. I'll be able to give you and Chloe a better life," he said, eyes shining with the prospect of leaving Clayton, seeing the capital, entering a world so different from ours. My heart tightened just thinking of my son far away, but also filled with pride seeing his effort, his determination. The problem, as always, was money. How to afford college in Birmingham. Rent, food, transport, materials, it was a world of expenses my 3 jobs could barely handle. That was when I took another difficult decision. I mortgaged a piece of Uncle Arthur's land. I didn't want to sell, but I needed the money urgently. The bank appraised it, offered a reasonable amount for the mortgage, with a long term to pay. It was risky, but I believed it was worth it. The sacrifice paid off. Michael passed the entrance exam, went to live in Birmingham, in a cheap but decent student dorm. He started studying law. Chloe and I stayed in Clayton, her finishing high school, me continuing the daily struggle. The house felt emptier, quieter without Michael. Sometimes I cried in secret at night, missing my boy, worried if he was eating right, if he wasn't going hungry to save the money I sent every month with such sacrifice. Chloe, now with more space without her brother around, bloomed in unexpected ways. She started helping me more in the pottery workshop, creating her own pieces, selling at the market beside me. Her strong personality, which caused problems at school, was an asset at the fair. She knew how to handle difficult customers, hagglers, people who tried to undervalue our work. Little by little, we formed quite a team. We started getting invited to fairs in neighboring towns, cultural events, craft shows. It was at one of these fairs, in Dothan, that Chloe met James, an architecture student from Birmingham visiting relatives in town. The young man was charmed by our ceramics and by Chloe, of course. Soon they were dating, despite the distance. He came to Clayton on weekends when he could. She occasionally went to Birmingham, staying at his aunt's house. He seemed like a good young man, polite, hard-working, with concrete plans for the future. I was happy for my daughter, thinking life was finally starting to smile at us after so much struggle. Can you imagine? Me alone, raising 2 children, working 3 different jobs, and still molding ceramics at dawn. All this to give an education to those who later wanted to bury me alive. And tell me something that intrigues me to this day. Do you think children have an obligation to take care of their parents in old age? Or is that outdated? I want to see what you think in the comments. Michael's college was going well. He was dedicated, got good grades, already talked about internships at important firms in Birmingham. He started dating a professor's daughter, a girl from a wealthy family, who introduced him to social circles he would never have access to on his own. The few times he came to Clayton, he already dressed differently, spoke differently, had acquired big city tastes and habits. He stayed little time at home, always in a rush to go back, as if our simple life suffocated him. It hurt, but I understood or thought I understood. "It's just like that," my mother consoled me. "Children are like birds, they grow wings and fly." Chloe, on the other hand, seemed increasingly rooted in Clayton and our family tradition with clay. After finishing high school, she decided not to go to college immediately. She wanted to dedicate herself to pottery, improve her technique, expand our small business. With James's help, who understood design and marketing because of his architecture course, we started modernizing our pieces a bit, creating a visual identity, advertising in channels beyond the traditional market. The work started to bear fruit. Our ceramics gained regional recognition, started being sold in craft stores in Birmingham, Atlanta, even up north. For the first time in decades, I felt I could breathe a little. I didn't need to clean houses anymore. I kept only the work at the diner on Saturdays, more for pleasure, for social contact, than absolute necessity. But life has these ironies. Just when things were starting to improve financially, Michael and Chloe changed. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Michael, graduated in law and already working at a firm in Birmingham, came less and less to Clayton. When he came, he stayed at his girlfriend's parents' house, now fiancé, who had a vacation home near town. He barely stopped by home for coffee, always with excuses of appointments, lack of time. Chloe, after marrying James and moving to Birmingham, also drifted away. Calls were faster, visits more spaced out. When I asked about my grandkids, since both already had children, I received evasive answers, promises of visits that didn't materialize. The silence in my house became a physical weight, heavier than any sack of wet clay I ever lifted. I would sit on the porch, listening to the wind chime, and realize I hadn't spoken a single word out loud for 3 days. I started inventing conversations in my head just to keep my mind sharp. I'd tell the ghosts of my past about the weather, about the arthritis in my knuckles. I convinced myself that their absence was the price of their success. I told myself, "Margaret, you did your job too well. You gave them wings so strong they flew right past you." But deep down, in the hollow pit of my stomach, I knew it wasn't just independence, it was indifference. And indifference is a cold draft that chills you to the bone. I realized, with a heavy heart, that my children were ashamed of me, of our simple house, my work with clay, my raspy country voice that didn't fit into the sophisticated world they now frequented. A hick voice. I once heard Michael comment on the phone thinking I wasn't listening. But I swallowed that pride like so many others in life. After all, the important thing was that they were doing well, building their lives, raising their children with comfort I could never give them. If for that they needed to distance themselves from their country mother, so be it. Mother's love is like that. Accepts, understands, forgives, even when it hurts. It was during this period that Clayton began to grow towards Uncle Arthur's land. The construction of a new state highway, connecting the town to important economic hubs, tremendously increased the value of that area. Suddenly, what was a piece of ground in the middle of nowhere became a prime location for subdivisions, condos, commercial areas. Buyers started appearing interested in the land. First, small local investors, then larger developers from Birmingham and even other states. Offers went up, reaching amounts I never imagined seeing in my life. It was enough money to buy a nice house anywhere in the country, live comfortably for the rest of my days, leave a considerable inheritance for my children and grandchildren. But something stopped me from selling. It wasn't just sentimental attachment to Uncle Arthur's last gift. It was a kind of intuition, a feeling that land was my only true security in a world changing too fast. Land doesn't go away, my father used to say. Money comes and goes, but land stays. And I, potter's daughter, woman of clay, always had this visceral connection with the earth, this understanding of its value beyond money. Pressures to sell increased. Agents knocked on the door every week. Letters from developers arrived by mail. Even the Clayton City Hall showed interest, talking about eminent domain for public utility projects they never quite explained. I maintained my position. The land was not for sale, at least not for now. That was when Michael and Chloe suddenly started getting more interested in Clayton, in my life, in my decisions. More frequent calls, surprise visits, gifts they never gave me before. At first I was moved, thinking they had realized the lost time and wanted to make up for it. How naive of me. I didn't realize the sudden interest coincided exactly with the news about the appreciation of Uncle Arthur's land. They started subtly with comments like, "Mom, don't you think this house is too much work for a person of your age? Wouldn't a smaller apartment, easier to care for, be better? Or, that land is so much work, so much worry. You should sell, enjoy life a little. After all, you've worked so much." When they saw I didn't yield to indirect suggestions, they got more direct. "Mom, we already have an interested buyer for the land. They offered a fortune. You can buy a beach house, live without worrying about money for the rest of your life." As if I didn't know the offers they brought were always lower than the ones I received directly. As if I didn't realize they were already calculating how much of the fortune would be theirs. Thus began the story that would culminate in that surreal scene at Grace Community Church. My own children, those I raised with such sacrifice, for whom I sold even my wedding jewelry, for whom I worked 3 different jobs, were plotting behind my back. Not out of necessity. Both had good jobs, their own homes, comfortable lives. It was pure greed. The shine of easy money blinded any remnant of gratitude, filial love, basic human decency. And to think it all started with clay. The same clay my father molded with calloused but precise hands. The same clay that taught me patience, persistence, to transform pain into beauty. The same clay that supported my family in the hardest times. It was from this clay that the woman I am today was born. A woman who, even at 76, discovered she still had strength to be reborn after being buried by her own children. Time passed, and I got used to simple life in Clayton. The pains of raising 2 children alone were being replaced by the pride of seeing them set in life. At least that's what I thought. Michael already had his law firm in Birmingham, married to Jennifer, that professor's daughter, and Chloe managed a craft store with her husband James. I continued living alone in the same house where I raised my children, waking up early to work with clay, telling my stories at the fair, and selling my pieces which, thank God, always had steady customers. I won't lie. Old age arrived heavier than I expected. I didn't have the same energy as before. My fingers started getting a bit stiff because of arthritis. And that back pain that accompanied me since my cleaning days decided to become my constant companion. But the worst wasn't that. What hurt deep was the distance from the children. Michael and Chloe called once in a while, always in a rush, always with that tone of someone talking to a child. "Are you eating right, Mom? Taking your meds on time?" As if I hadn't spent my whole life taking care of myself. Visits, then, were increasingly rare. When they came to Clayton, they stayed in hotels or at friends' houses. They popped by the house quickly, always with excuses not to stay long. "We have to go back today, Mom. Kids have school tomorrow. I have an important client waiting." I pretended to believe, but deep down I knew they were ashamed of the simple house where they grew up, the smell of clay that permeated the walls. The mother with calloused hands and raspy voice who didn't fit into the sophisticated world they now frequented. It was like that until the day Uncle Arthur's land turned to gold. Clayton had grown a lot, and that piece of ground, which used to be isolated in the middle of nowhere, was now in the path of progress. A big developer from Birmingham wanted to buy the whole area to make a luxury-gated community, with a golf course, club, and the whole 9 yards. The initial offer was $1.5 million, money I couldn't even imagine, to tell the truth. When the news spread, it was like magic. My children reappeared in my life. Suddenly, Michael called every day. Chloe started sending gifts, fine clothes I would never wear, expensive creams that stayed closed in the cabinet, even one of those modern cell phones I barely knew how to turn on. At first, I was emotional. Finally, my children remembered they have a mother. I thought, silly me. It didn't take long to realize the sudden interest had a first and last name. Land money. It started with hints. "Mom, you're already 76. You need to think about the future," said Michael. "That land just gives work and worry. Why not sell now and enjoy life? You deserve to rest. Chloe went along the same line. Imagine, Mommy, with that money you could buy an apartment right near us in Birmingham. You wouldn't need to work anymore. You could even travel, see places, as if I wanted to leave Clayton, as if I could live far from my clay, my fairs, my stories, as if I didn't know they were more interested in securing the inheritance than in my well-being. But I was raised to respect children, not to make a fuss. So I just listened and changed the subject. Let's see one day. Who knows, I'd say, without committing. The pressure increased little by little. Calls got more frequent, visits too. One day, Michael showed up with a document in hand. Look, Mom, I brought an important business thing for you to sign. It's just a will to ensure that when the time comes, everything is organized, without bureaucracy. Will. What an ugly word that seemed to hasten my departure from this world. I asked to read the document, but Michael got impatient. No need to worry about these details, Mom. It's legal language. You won't understand anyway. Just sign here at the bottom. Trust me. Trust him. Of course I trusted, he was my son, but trusting blindly, without knowing what I was signing, leave the paper here, son. I'll ask Mr. Wilson at the pharmacy to take a look for me. He understands these things. Mr. Wilson was my longtime friend, an educated man who had even started law school in his youth. Michael's face closed immediately. No need to bother Mr. Wilson with this, Mom. These are family matters. I insisted, and he ended up putting the paper back in his briefcase, visibly annoyed. Leave it for next time, then. He left shortly after, barely saying goodbye properly. That left me with a flea behind my ear. The next day, I sought out Mr. Wilson and told him the story. He scratched his chin thoughtfully. Mrs. Sullivan, you do well not to sign anything without reading. A son is a son, but money is money, and it messes with people's heads. He advised me to find an independent lawyer, no one known by your children, and recommended a nephew of his who had an office in Dothan, a neighboring town. I didn't go find that lawyer immediately. I thought I was exaggerating, that it was ugly to suspect my own children, but the attempts continued. Now it was Chloe bringing another little paper for me to sign. Now it was Michael coming back to charge with that will. When I resisted, they got irritated, impatient. You're getting too suspicious, Mom, complained Chloe. I don't know where your head is at, thinking we want to cheat you, said Michael with that offended lawyer voice. It was around that time I got a call from Helen, my childhood friend who lived in Birmingham. We had grown up together in Clayton, but she moved when she married over 50 years ago. Even with the distance, we kept in touch. Occasionally I went to visit her, stay a few days at her house, meet the grandkids. It was always a relief to get out of Clayton a bit, have someone to talk to without needing to pretend I didn't notice ulterior motives. I have a serious problem with my bones. The doctor ordered bed rest, but I have no one to help me here. Could you come spend a few days with me? I know it's asking a lot, but I have no one else. Helen's voice was weak, tired. How could I deny? I packed a small suitcase, left the house key with Patricia, my trusted neighbor, and told my children I was going to spend 2 weeks in Birmingham. Their reaction surprised me. Instead of thanking me for letting them know, they were visibly annoyed. Right now, Mom? We were planning to come there on the weekend to settle that paperwork, said Michael. You shouldn't travel alone at that age, argued Chloe. I had to remind them I've traveled alone since I was 17, going to sell pottery at fairs in neighboring towns. I left for Birmingham on a Monday, on the 6 a.m. bus. The trip was smooth. I arrived at the station around noon. Helen had sent her grandson to pick me up. Her house was simple but cozy, in a middle-class neighborhood of Birmingham. The bone problem was real. She could barely get out of bed alone. She needed help even to go to the bathroom. Good thing I went, I thought. True friendship is like that. We help each other in hard times. I spent the first week caring for her, making food, cleaning the house, giving medicine on time. In free moments we talked about old times, how Clayton had changed, about children and grandchildren. I told her about the pressure I was suffering because of the land, about the papers they wanted me to sign. Careful, Margaret, she warned me, eyes serious. I've seen too many stories of children cheating parents when money is involved. Don't sign anything without being sure what it is. By the second week, Helen was already better, managing to move more easily. That was when I started feeling that agony in my chest, that bad feeling that wouldn't let me sleep right. I dreamed of my house being invaded, Uncle Arthur's land being fenced with barbed wire, my children laughing while counting money. I woke up sweating cold, heart racing. On the third day of these nightmares, I decided I needed to go back to Clayton. I couldn't take that anguish anymore. I needed to see with my own eyes that everything was okay. They call it a mother's intuition for a reason. Deep down, Margaret's spirit knew something was rotting in Clayton before her mind could even accept it. If you've ever had a gut feeling that you just couldn't shake, you know exactly why she had to get on that bus. Helen tried to convince me to stay. It must just be your imagination, Margaret. You're tired, worried, rest a few more days. But I was decided. On Wednesday, very early, I took the first bus to Clayton, without telling anyone, not my children, not Patricia. I wanted to arrive by surprise, feel people's reaction to my face. The bus left Birmingham at 5 a.m., and around 10, I was pulling into the Clayton station. It was there, stepping off the bus with my handbag, that the world turned upside down. I had barely set foot on the ground when I saw Patricia entering the station. She was coming distracted, checking the time on her wristwatch, probably waiting for someone. When she saw me, her face transformed into a mask of terror. Eyes widened, mouth opened in a silent scream, and she stumbled back as if she had seen a ghost. "Patricia, what is it, woman? Looks like you've seen a soul from the other world," I joked, approaching. She didn't answer, just stood looking at me in a state of shock, hand on chest, as if her heart wanted to jump out. I started to get genuinely worried. "Are you feeling sick? Do you want me to call someone?" That was when she finally managed to speak, voice nothing more than a hoarse whisper. "Margaret, is it really you? But, didn't you die?" "Died? Me? What crazy story is that?" I thought my neighbor had lost her mind for good. "What kind of talk is this, Patricia? I'm more alive than many dead folks around. I just went to visit my friend Helen in Birmingham. You yourself kept my house key." Little by little, as we sat on a station bench, the story unfolded. 3 days after my departure for Birmingham, my children had appeared in Clayton with the news that I had suffered a massive stroke at Helen's house. According to them, I had died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. My body had been viewed in Birmingham itself due to the advanced state of decomposition from the heat and buried in a cemetery there. The whole town was in mourning. Neighbors, friends, my pottery customers, all shocked by my sudden departure. And today, that very afternoon, the memorial service would happen at the Grace Community Church at 5 p.m. sharp. Every word that came out of Patricia's mouth was like a punch in my stomach. I couldn't breathe right. The world seemed to spin around me. My own children had killed me. Not for real, of course, but on paper, in words, in people's minds. They had symbolically buried me to keep my land, my house, the money they coveted so much. "And what else have they been doing, Patricia?" I asked when I managed to recover speech. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "Well, Mrs. Sullivan, they've already emptied almost your entire house, took the furniture, your ceramics, even clothes. They said they were going to donate to charity, and I heard they are already negotiating with a developer to sell your uncle's land." They hadn't wasted time, the wretches. They had barely buried me, and were already taking possession of everything that was mine. But how can they sell the land, Patricia? They need documents, power of attorney, those things. That was when the penny dropped. I remembered the papers they insisted so much I sign. Probably, when they saw I wouldn't yield, they decided to go for a more drastic plan. Falsified documents, powers of attorney, maybe even a will. With Michael being a lawyer, it shouldn't be hard to find ways for this fraud. Blood rushed to my head. I started shaking with rage. It wasn't just the money, the land, the house. It was the betrayal, the lie, the dishonor to my name. They had buried me alive, disrespected my existence, my memory, everything I built with such sacrifice. "Patricia," I said, holding her hands tightly, "you are not going to tell anyone you saw me, understand? Let everyone think I'm still dead. But why, Mrs. Sullivan? Because I want to see their faces when I appear at my own memorial service. I want all of Clayton to see the size of the lie, the betrayal. I want my children unmasked in front of everyone. Patricia widened her eyes. Are you really going to do that? Give a scare that big? I am, I answered, decision already made. And you are going to help me. Let's go to your house now. I can't be seen on the street before the time. I spent the rest of that day hiding in Patricia's house, my head boiling with indignation. While she told me more details, I pieced together the puzzle of this macabre farce. The supposed stroke, the closed casket viewing, which certainly was full of rocks or sand to simulate a body's weight, the falsified documents, the rushed sale of my things and land, all planned in minute detail by the fruit of my womb, the same ones I had raised with such love and sacrifice. Around 4 p.m., I started getting ready for the grand appearance. I took a long shower, combed my gray hair carefully, put on my beige Sunday dress, the same one I had taken in the suitcase to Birmingham. I put on light lipstick, put on the only pair of earrings I had left. I wanted to be presentable when I returned from the world of the dead. Patricia looked at me with a mix of admiration and fear. Mrs. Sullivan, are you sure? Wouldn't it be better to go to the police? Do things the right way? The right way, Patricia, is the truth. And the truth has to be revealed in the same proportion as the lie. They killed me in front of everyone, so I'm going to resurrect in front of everyone too. At 4:30, I left her house and walked slowly to Grace Community Church. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would come out my mouth. My legs trembled, but not from fear, from anger, determination, a strength I didn't even know I still had at 76. Every step took me closer to the confrontation that would forever change my relationship with my children. I arrived at the church, 10 minutes to 5. From outside, I could already hear Reverend Thomas's voice talking about dear Sister Margaret, taken so prematurely from our midst. A little more and I heard the names of my children, so shaken by the sudden loss of their dear mother. Good Lord, how could they lie with such shamelessness? I stopped before the closed church doors, took a deep breath, adjusted my dress. It was the moment of truth. I pushed the heavy doors with all the strength I had, feeling the creak of the old wood echo through the temple. The sound made some heads turn toward the entrance, but most remained focused on the altar, where Reverend Thomas was celebrating the service. I walked down the center aisle with firm steps, the heel of my shoe hitting rhythmically on the stone floor. Click, 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 like a clock marking the time of truth, the moment of revelation. People started noticing my presence little by little. First those in the back pews, then the middle, in a wave of shock advancing toward the altar. I heard stifled gasps, exclamations of astonishment. I saw people crossing themselves, others covering their mouths with hands, some even pinching themselves to be sure they weren't dreaming. I continued walking impassive, eyes fixed on my children who were in the front row, backs to me, still oblivious to the commotion growing in the church. Reverend Thomas was the first at the front to see me. The poor man turned pale, as if he himself were turning into a ghost. The Bible he held slipped through his fingers, falling on the altar with a dull thud. He stopped mid-sentence, mouth open in shock. It was this sudden silence that made my children finally turn around. Oh my God! Their expression, there is no money in the world that pays for what I felt at that moment. Michael, always so controlled and sure of himself, turned paper white, eyes almost popping out. Chloe let out a high-pitched scream, grabbed her brother's arm, as if she had seen the devil himself. They tried to retreat, hide, but there was nowhere to run. I stopped about 3 steps from them, right in front of the altar, and spoke with the firmest, loudest voice I could manage. Well then, it seems the news of my death was somewhat exaggerated. The silence in the church was so dense you could cut it with a knife, until Reverend Thomas, recovering a bit of composure, managed to stammer, "Margaret, is it really you? Praise God. It's a miracle." "No miracle, Reverend. What we have here is a crime." I turned directly to my children, who remained paralyzed with shock. My own children declared me dead while I was visiting a friend in Birmingham. They invented a stroke story, held a viewing with a closed casket. I just want to know what was inside that box. All this to get their hands on my land and my house. Or are you going to deny it? It was as if a powder keg exploded inside the church. People started talking all at once, some shouting, others crossing themselves, many approaching to touch me, confirm I was real. Michael, trying to regain control of the situation, took a step forward, face still pale, but voice trying to sound firm. "Mom, you don't understand," we thought. There was a misunderstanding. He stammered, searching for words that could explain the inexplicable, as if there could be a misunderstanding in declaring your own mother dead. Chloe, always hotter-headed, tried another approach. She advanced toward me with anger in her eyes. "What are you doing here? You weren't supposed to come back yet." In the confusion of the moment, she let the truth slip. I wasn't supposed to come back. And there it is. The smoking gun. In her panic, Chloe just confessed to the entire town that this was a timed heist, not a funeral. You almost have to pity their stupidity if they weren't so incredibly cruel. But don't go anywhere, because the sheriff is about to make his move. I was supposed to be in Birmingham for another week, enough time for them to conclude the sale of my properties. "So you admit it? You planned all this?" I shouted, feeling hot tears running down my face. "You killed your own mother on paper for money. What kind of children did I raise?" The church turned into absolute pandemonium. People shouting, some crying, others arguing among themselves. Reverend Thomas tried to re-establish order, but his voice got lost in the tumult. I saw some men approach my children menacingly, faces twisted in indignation. For a moment, I feared the situation would descend into physical violence. "Nobody is going to take justice into their own hands," declared Reverend Thomas, stepping between the crowd and my children. "This is a matter for the authorities. Mrs. Sullivan is alive, thank God, and can seek her rights legally." At that moment, I noticed the presence of a man I didn't know, standing in a discreet corner of the church. He wore a suit and tie, carried a leather briefcase, observed everything with attentive and professional eyes. Later, I discovered it was David Anderson, representative of the developer, negotiating the purchase of my land with my children. Land that, according to falsified documents, now belonged to them by inheritance. The man approached and introduced himself formally. "Mrs. Margaret Sullivan? I am David Anderson from Horizon Developers. We were in the process of acquiring your land, but I see there was an information problem here. Our company does not condone any type of fraud. We will be available to collaborate with investigations." Meanwhile, Sheriff Miller, retired but respected by everyone in Clayton, had already approached my children. Even without being in official office, he still carried the weight of authority. "Michael, Chloe, I think you better come with me to the station. We have a lot to talk about." My children's expression was complete defeat. The castle of lies they had built collapsed in a matter of minutes. Without resisting, they let themselves be led out of the church, heads down, avoiding the gaze of people who moved away to make a path, some spitting on the ground in a sign of contempt. I stayed there in the middle of the church, surrounded by neighbors, friends, acquaintances, all wanting to touch me, hug me, express relief seeing me alive. But inside, I was more dead than alive. My own children's betrayal had opened a hole in my chest that no hug could fill. When I discovered my own children had killed me on paper to keep my land, my blood boiled hotter than clay in the kiln. If this story is making your blood boil too, hit that like button with the same strength. I squeezed my hands not to faint when I heard the news of my own death. I left the church, supported by Mrs. Higgins, the midwife who had helped bring Michael and Chloe into the world. The irony didn't escape me. The woman who helped them be born now helped me deal with their betrayal. Outside, the sun was already setting, painting the Clayton sky an intense red, as if nature itself reflected my indignation. What happened after that day was a roller coaster of emotions and bureaucracy. I had to prove I was alive. Imagine needing to prove such a thing. I had to annul the fraudulent death certificate, cancel probate already started, recover property documents. Michael and Chloe faced serious charges: falsification of documents, fraud, larceny. The fact that Michael was a lawyer made everything even worse. He had used his legal knowledge to commit a crime. A lot of people asked me if I didn't pity my children, if I didn't think the punishment was too great. How to explain that the worst punishment wasn't the legal process, possible prison, public shame, The worst punishment was knowing the two beings I loved most in the world had been capable of killing me for money, that they had coldly planned to erase my existence, my memory, everything I represented because of land and a house. No, it wasn't just greed. It was deeper, more painful. It was as if they were ashamed of their own roots, as if they wanted to bury with me the whole story of the Potter mother, the woman of hands calloused by clay and struggle, of Margaret with the raspy voice who told stories at the fair to earn a living. They wanted the money, yes, but they also wanted to get rid of what I represented, the humble origin that didn't match the life of appearances they had built in Birmingham. While I awaited legal developments, I returned to my house, or what was left of it. Most of the furniture was gone, many of my ceramics too. What they didn't manage to sell or take, they threw away like trash. I found some of my oldest pieces broken in the backyard, shards of clay that seemed to reflect the state of my heart. The worst was finding the small trunk where I kept the most precious memories. The wedding album with Walter, locks of hair from Michael and Chloe's first haircuts, drawings they made at school, letters they wrote me when they were in college, all thrown in the trash, as if those memories meant nothing. They didn't just throw away photos. They threw away their own childhood. Can you imagine prioritizing paper money over the first lock of hair from your own baby head? That's a poverty of spirit no bank account can fix. As if the life we had together, the struggles, the dreams, the moments of happiness, were all just a hindrance to be discarded to make room for new money. That was when I cried for real, sitting on the floor of the almost empty house, hugging that trunk soaked with rain, stained photos, blurred letters. I cried not for the money, for the land, for the house. I cried for the ingratitude, cruelty, lack of love. I cried for the mother who sold wedding jewelry to pay for school, who worked 3 different jobs to give a future to her children, who gave up everything for them and who, in the end, was buried alive by them in exchange for money. That night, alone in that house that didn't seem mine anymore, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this betrayal destroy me. I wouldn't bow before evil, even coming from my own children. I, Margaret Sullivan, woman of clay and stories, had survived my husband's death, poverty, the lonely struggle to raise 2 children. I would also survive this symbolic death, this burial in life they tried to impose on me. Like the clay I so often wet with my tears and transformed into beauty, I would transform too. I would rise from the ashes of this betrayal stronger, more determined, and I would show all of Clayton, my ungrateful children, the world, that clay doesn't break that easily. The days following my resurrection in church were a real commotion in Clayton. The story ran faster than water downhill. It reached neighboring towns. The woman who resurrected to unmask her children. That's what they called me. People came from far away just to meet me, confirm I was really alive. Clayton had never seen a scandal of that size, but I dispensed with the fame. What I really wanted was justice, to recover what was rightfully mine, to show you don't bury an old woman like me just like that. The day after that historic service, very early, I got ready and went straight to the station. Sheriff Miller, the current one, Sheriff Perkins, a serious man in his 52nds, was waiting for me. Sheriff Miller, the retired one, had prepared the ground. Mrs. Sullivan, it's a pleasure to meet you. Alive. The sheriff even attempted a smile, a rare thing for that man, always so grumpy. Mr. Miller told me what happened. It's a case without precedent here in our town. In the whole world, Sheriff, I answered, adjusting myself on the hard wooden chair. Where have you ever seen a child kill a mother on paper to steal her land? Not even in Netflix dramas is there a story like this. I started giving my statement, telling everything in minute detail. The pressure to sell the land, the papers they wanted me to sign, the trip to Birmingham, the early return, the shock of discovering my own death. While I spoke, the clerk typed everything on an old typewriter that made a hell of a noise. Clack, clack, clack. Every beat seemed to hammer the truth onto the paper. Do you have proof your children acted with criminal intent? Asked the sheriff. Always very technical. I have the main one. Myself, alive and breathing when they reported me dead. I have the neighbor who saw me at the bus station and almost fainted from fright. I have the man from the developer who was in the church, ready to close the deal with them. And I have my daughter's confession when she screamed in church. You weren't supposed to come back yet, for everyone to hear. The sheriff shook his head, impressed. It's a strong case, Mrs. Sullivan. We will investigate thoroughly. Are you willing to press formal charges against your children? This means they could go to prison. You know that, don't you? That question weighed like lead in my chest. Pressing charges against my own children, the same ones I carried 9 months in my belly, nursed, raised with such sacrifice it was like cutting my own flesh. But they hadn't thought twice before reporting me dead, throwing our memories in the trash, selling the house where they grew up. I am willing, Sheriff, I answered, with the firmest voice I could manage. I don't want them to go to prison, but I want them to learn the lesson. I want them to return what's mine, pay for what they did. I signed the formal complaint, hands shaking a little, heart tight. Seeing her children face consequences isn't a victory for Margaret, it's the final tragedy of a mother's love betrayed. Signing those papers is likely the hardest thing she will ever do, but sometimes peace comes with a heavy price. Stick around to see how she manages to rebuild her life from these ashes. That piece of paper made official the biggest heartbreak of my life, being on opposite sides of justice regarding my own children. Leaving the station, I found a surprise at the door. Mr. Henderson, a respected lawyer in town, was waiting for me. Mrs. Sullivan, I heard what happened. A shame what they did to you. I wanted to offer my services to represent you in this case, without charging anything. Without charging, Mr. Henderson? And why would you do that? I was suspicious immediately. Nothing in this world is free, especially a lawyer's service. Do you remember my mother, Mrs. Eleanor? You made that special table set for her with the cardinals she liked so much. It was the last gift I gave her before she passed. The joy in her eyes when she saw that work. I never forgot. It's my chance to pay you back. I got emotional. I remembered those pieces well. I had made them with special care. I never imagined they would return to my life this way, like a hand extended in the hour I needed most. I accept your help, lawyer, and may God bless you. The following days were a lot of work. Mr. Henderson was methodical, tireless. We filed lawsuits to annul the false death certificate, recover possession of my properties, cancel any sale or transaction made by my children in my name, and also a criminal action against them for identity fraud, larceny, and attempted misappropriation. When news of these actions reached Michael and Chloe in Birmingham, it was like throwing gasoline on the fire. They counterattacked, hiring an expensive lawyer from the capital. Their defense, that I had dementia, had disappeared from home without telling anyone, that they really believed in my death upon receiving an anonymous phone call saying I had suffered a stroke. Bald-faced lie. I screamed when Mr. Henderson showed me their arguments. I did warn I was going to Birmingham. And how do they explain the closed casket viewing? How do they explain the falsified death certificate and the rush to sell everything? Calm down, Mrs. Sullivan, said Mr. Henderson, adjusting his glasses on his nose. They are desperate, and that is good for us. They will end up contradicting themselves, making mistakes. We just need to keep a cool head and gather more proof. We also found out how they pulled off the death certificate, Henderson added, pulling a file from his briefcase. Michael used an old connection at the county coroner's office, a clerk with a gambling problem, just like him. It seems favors were called in to bypass the proper medical examinations. That clerk is already cooperating with the police. One of these proofs appeared unexpectedly. Mr. Wilson, the pharmacist I wanted to show the documents Michael wanted me to sign, sought me out with precious information. Mrs. Sullivan, remember you told me your son insisted you sign some papers? Well, I think I know why. He owes a fortune to some loan sharks in Birmingham. My nephew, who works at a bank there, told me Michael tried to take out a big loan to cover gambling debts but was refused for having bad credit. Gambling debts? My Michael, the studious boy I raised with such care, the successful lawyer? I couldn't believe it. But at the same time, it explained a lot. The rush to get money, the coldness in reporting me dead, the inhumanity in discarding my memories like trash. 2 days later, another bomb. An employee from Chloe's craft store in Birmingham came to find me. She had been fired recently and was hurt. Mrs. Sullivan, Your daughter and her husband are drowning in debt. The store is almost bankrupt. They took out a loan with loan sharks, too. I heard them talking that they needed the money from your land to save their skins. I heard it with these ears the earth will eat one day. The picture became clearer and clearer. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation. My children were being cornered by debts, threatened by loan sharks, seeing their businesses go down the drain. Instead of asking for my help openly, they opted for the darker path. Eliminate me, at least on paper, to keep my land. All this information was added to the case. Mr. Henderson was meticulous. He didn't let anything escape. With every new piece of evidence, the case against my children got stronger. While justice followed its slow course, I needed to find strength to keep living. The house I recovered was practically empty. Many of my ceramics had been sold or broken, my family memories thrown away. It was like starting from zero at 76. That was where the clay saved me once more. Like in the hardest times, after Walter's death, I dove into pottery work, not to go crazy. I went back to waking up early, preparing the clay, sitting at the wheel and letting my hands guide my heart. But now the pieces coming out were different. They weren't the traditional pitchers, jars, and pots I always made. They were expressive figures, faces twisted in pain, hands raised in supplication, broken bodies seeking to rise again. Resurrection. That was what I called this new series of sculptures. Every piece told a piece of my story, the shock of discovering my own death, entering the church during the memorial service, the confrontation with the traitorous children, the struggle to rebuild life. It was my pain transformed into art, my suffering molded in clay and hardened by fire. Patricia, who continued being my guardian angel throughout this process, encouraged me to exhibit these pieces at the town fair. Folks need to see, Mrs. Sullivan. It's your story, but it's also the story of the strength of a woman who didn't let herself be buried alive. Reluctant at first, I ended up accepting the suggestion. On a Saturday morning, I set up a small booth at the Clayton Market with my new creations. The impact was immediate. People stopped, looked, touched the pieces with reverence. Many cried hearing the stories each sculpture represented. Others hugged me, offered words of solidarity, told their own stories of betrayal and overcoming. By the end of that first day at the fair, I had sold almost all the pieces, not for the money, which wasn't even that much, but for the connection those sculptures created. It was as if, by sharing my pain through clay, I helped others deal with their own wounds. One of the people who stopped at my booth that day was George Sterling, owner of an art gallery in Birmingham. He examined the few remaining pieces for a long time, asking questions about technique, materials, inspiration. Mrs. Sullivan, this isn't craft. It's art. Pure, visceral, authentic art. I would like to exhibit your work in my gallery in Birmingham. Would you agree? I almost laughed in his face. Me, an old country potter, exhibiting in a fancy gallery in the capital. It seemed like a joke, but the man was serious, even left me his card and everything. Meanwhile, the court case advanced. The judge ordered that all assets sold or removed from my house be tracked and, when possible, returned. Transactions made in my name after the date of my death were annulled. And most importantly, Uncle Arthur's land was officially recognized as mine, with a prohibition on any negotiation until the end of the criminal trial. Michael and Chloe continued defending themselves tooth and nail. Their lawyer tried everything, claiming there was just a misunderstanding, that they acted in good faith, that they had no intention to harm me. But the evidence was too strong, the contradictions in their stories too evident. The hardest moment was when I had to testify in court with my children present in the room. It was the first time I saw them in person since the day at the church. They looked haggard, thinner, with deep circles under their eyes. For an instant, my mother's heart almost wavered. I almost wanted to give up everything, hug them, say everything was okay. But then I remembered my memories thrown in the trash, the closed casket they displayed at the viewing in Birmingham, the lies they spread so easily, and my determination returned full force. Mrs. Sullivan, began the judge, a balding man with a serious expression. Could you tell us in your own words what happened? With a raspy but firm voice, I narrated the whole story, from the first pressures to sell the land to the moment I entered the church and unmasked the farce. While I spoke, I kept my eyes fixed on my children. I wanted them to see in my eyes not only the hurt and indignation, but also the strength they had underestimated. When I finished, their lawyers started the cross-examination, trying to confuse me, make me seem senile and resentful. Don't you think you're exaggerating? That perhaps there was just a misunderstanding due to your advanced age? My advanced age gave me experience, not senility, I retorted, drawing some smiles in the room. There is no misunderstanding in reporting a person dead when she is alive. There is no misunderstanding in falsifying documents, holding a closed casket viewing, selling her things as if she had already turned to dust. That has a name: crime. The judge asked for silence when the audience started murmuring in approval. I continued answering questions with clarity and firmness, denying the defense's allegations one by one. At the end of the testimony, I felt I had done my part for justice to be served. Leaving the courthouse, I found a group of neighbors and friends who had gone to support me. Among them was Mrs. Higgins, the midwife who had helped bring Michael and Chloe into the world. Her eyes were teary. "You were brave in there, Margaret," she said, hugging me. "It must have been too hard to face your own children like that." Harder was discovering they buried me alive, Dorothy. After that, facing them in court was actually easy. We went back together to Clayton. A small procession of cars and trucks that looked more like a parade. That community support was fundamental for me during the whole process. Neighbors who took turns keeping me company, helping with daily chores, taking me to the neighboring town where hearings happened. People I barely knew brought food, offered rides, asked how they could help. It was as if all of Clayton had united to repair the evil my own children had done to me. While awaiting the final sentence, I continued working on my resurrection sculpture series. Every piece coming out of my hands seemed better than the last, as if pain was refining my art. George Sterling, the gallery owner from Birmingham, came regularly to Clayton to follow my work. He had already set a date for the exhibition in the Capitol, had prepared invitations, made contacts with the press. "You have no idea of the interest your story and art are awakening, Mrs. Sullivan," he said enthusiastically. "There are art critics from New York wanting to come for the opening. International collectors asking if your pieces will be for sale." I just shook my head, incredulous. How could I, at 76, be at the peak of my artistic career? How could, from the greatest personal tragedy of my life, be born my greatest professional success? Life has these ironies we never quite understand. Finally, 6 months after that historic service, came the judge's sentence. Michael and Chloe were convicted of identity fraud, larceny, and attempted misappropriation. The sentence: 5 years in prison for each, converted to community service and payment of a fine because they were first-time offenders and had good records. They were also ordered to pay me damages for moral and material harm in the amount of $150,000. When Mr. Henderson gave me the news over the phone, I stayed silent for a long time. I didn't know if I was relieved or disappointed, happy or sad. It was justice, yes, but it was also the final confirmation that my children, those I raised with such love and sacrifice, had become people capable of such cruel crimes against their own mother. "Are you okay, Mrs. Sullivan?" asked Mr. Henderson, worried about my silence. "I am, lawyer, just thinking that in this whole story there is no winner. I won in court, but I lost my children." They lost in court, but they had already lost their humanity long before. In the following days, I received calls from journalists wanting interviews, TV shows wanting to tell my story. I refused most. I didn't want to turn my family tragedy into a spectacle. The only media I accepted was an interview for the local Clayton newspaper, out of gratitude for the support the community gave me throughout the process. 1 week after the sentence, I received a letter from Michael. His handwriting, always so firm and elegant, now trembled on the paper. He asked for forgiveness, said he was regretful, that the pressure of debts had clouded his judgment, explained he had started betting to try to get out of a financial crisis, but only sank deeper, said he loved me, missed me, wanted a chance to rebuild our relationship. I read and reread that letter several times, looking for sincerity between the lines. Was there genuine regret there, Or just fear of consequences? Was it a son's love or interest in the indemnity money? There was no way to know. I kept the letter in a drawer without answering. Maybe one day, when the wound wasn't so open, I could consider forgiveness. Not now, not yet. Chloe didn't write, didn't call. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she and her husband had separated, that the craft store had gone bankrupt for good, that she was living with a friend in Birmingham. Part of me felt pity. Another part thought she was reaping what she sowed. Just think, I had to sue my own children, blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh. I never imagined reaching this point. And so I ask you, if it were your mother, your father, would you report your children to the police after a betrayal like this or give a second chance? What would you have done in my place? While I fought in court, my artistic work flourished like never before. The exhibition at George Sterling's gallery in Birmingham was a resounding success. All pieces of the Resurrection series were sold on opening night, some for amounts I would never imagine receiving for something made with my calloused hands. Art critics praised the earthy strength of my sculptures, the visceral authenticity of my work, the powerful narrative of my pieces. Beautiful words I barely understood, to be honest. For me, it was just the clay my father taught me to mold, transformed by the pain my children taught me to feel. Sudden success brought opportunities I never imagined, invitations to exhibit in other galleries, other states, proposals to teach workshops, to participate in international art fairs, even a publisher interested in publishing a book about my life and work. I accepted some of these proposals, refused others. I didn't want to become a celebrity, didn't want to leave Clayton, didn't want to abandon my simple routine that cost so much to rebuild. I agreed to give some workshops for young people in the region, to do occasional exhibitions in nearby towns. The rest I thanked and dismissed. The indemnity money and sculpture sales gave me financial security I never had in life. I was able to renovate my house, buy new furniture to replace what was sold, recover some of the old ceramics my children had sold. I was also able to help people in the community going through difficulties, families without income, children needing school supplies, elderly without means to buy medicine. As for Uncle Arthur's land, I decided to keep it as I always wanted. Not out of stubbornness, not out of material attachment, but out of respect for his memory, and because after everything that happened, selling would be like saying my children were right. Instead, I ceded a part of the land to the city to build an art school, on the condition it had a pottery studio where I could teach Clayton children the art of clay. It was a way to pass on the knowledge my father transmitted to me, to ensure this tradition wouldn't be lost. The other part of the land I transformed into an open space for the community, with fruit trees, wooden benches, a small square where people could gather. I named it Resurrection Park, not for me, but for everyone who, like me, had to be reborn after devastating losses. Amidst all this transformation, something unexpected happened. I received a call from David Anderson, the developer representative who was at the church on the day of my resurrection. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm calling to say thank you. You have no idea what you prevented that day." I was confused. "Thank me? But why, son?" The developer I represented was involved in fraudulent schemes, using shell buyers to purchase land and launder money of dubious origin. I was just an employee following orders, but after what I saw in church, what you did, I started questioning everything. I ended up reporting the company directors to the authorities. I lost my job, of course, but recovered my dignity. And it all started with you walking into that church. That call made me realize something important. Our story is never just ours. The ripples of our actions reach shores we can't even imagine. My fight for justice had inspired that man to do the right thing, even costing his job. How many other people could be touched by my story, by my example? It was a weight too big to carry, but also a responsibility I couldn't ignore. In the months that followed, I was invited to give talks at schools, tell my story to at-risk youth, inspire women victims of violence to seek their rights. I never considered myself a speaker. My raspy voice, my simple way of speaking, my limited vocabulary didn't qualify me for that. But when I started telling my story, people stopped to listen, perhaps because they weren't just words, it was real life, genuine pain, authentic overcoming. One of these talks was at the law school where Michael studied in Birmingham. The students received me with such respect, so many interested questions, such sincere admiration, that for a moment, I wondered if my son would have become a different person if he had truly absorbed the values that institution tried to transmit. At the end of the talk, a young female student asked me, "Mrs. Sullivan, have you ever thought about forgiving your children?" The question caught me by surprise. It wasn't the first time someone asked that, but never in a room full of future lawyers, young people learning about justice and laws. "My child," I answered after a moment of silence, "forgiveness isn't something you decide to give or not give, like choosing a gift in a store. Forgiveness is a process, it's a path. I've been on this path since the day I walked into that church and saw the terror in my children's eyes. I don't know if I'll reach the end of it before leaving this world, but I'm walking with the legs God gave me and the heart life left me." That answer generated spontaneous applause that moved me deeply. It wasn't applause for the famous ceramicist, the award-winning artist, or the woman who resurrected. It was recognition of a basic human truth, that sometimes the journey is more important than the destination, that the process matters as much as the result. Leaving the college that day, I passed in front of the office where Michael worked before everything happened. For a moment, I felt like going in, asking about him, knowing how he was dealing with the consequences of his acts. But I didn't go in. It wasn't time yet. I wasn't ready yet. The path of forgiveness is long, and I was just at the beginning of it. I went back to Clayton that night, to my simple but welcoming house, to my studio full of clay and stories, to my community that embraced me when my own children buried me. There was my place. There was my safe harbor. There was where I, Margaret Sullivan, had resurrected not only from death on paper but also from the death of the soul that betrayal could have caused. And while kneading the clay to create new pieces, new stories, new pieces of my soul transformed into art, I felt that, despite everything, I still had a lot to live, a lot to create, a lot to teach. The life my children tried to erase was more alive than ever, pulsing in my calloused hands, in my wounded but resilient heart, in my raspy but firm voice, which now told not only folklore stories, but my own story of death and resurrection. 8 years have passed since that day I walked into Grace Community Church and gave the biggest scare in the history of Clayton. Today, I have 84 years on my back. More wrinkled, more stooped, but also wiser, stronger, and who would have said, more famous than I ever imagined. My life has changed so much that sometimes I pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming. That simple Margaret who sold ceramics at the fair and told stories to attract customers is now known all over the U.S. Master Margaret of the Clay, they call me out there. My pieces are in museums, private collections, have even reached abroad. The Resurrection series opened doors I didn't even know existed. After the first exhibition in Birmingham came invitations from New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, even from outside the country. I went to only a few. I'm too old to go running around the world, but I sent my pieces to represent our art, our culture, our strength. I received awards, honors, even the title of honorary citizen in cities I had never set foot in. A university in New York gave me a beautiful diploma, all fancy, an honorary doctorate. To this day, I don't know exactly what it means, but I keep it with affection on the living room wall. The dean, a nice man who made a point of coming to Clayton to give me that diploma, explained to me, "You are an artist who teaches more than many doctors. But you know what makes me proudest? It's not the awards, not the exhibitions, not the money I never imagined having in life. It's seeing what I managed to do with Uncle Arthur's land, the very same that almost cost me my life. I kept the promise I made to myself and transformed part of the land into an art school. It started small, a simple shed with 5 pottery wheels, but it grew and grew. Today, the Harold Sullivan School of Art, in honor of my father, is a cultural center known throughout the South. It has pottery courses, painting, music, theater, even literature. People come from far away to learn, to teach, to exchange knowledge. On the rest of the land, as I planned, I made Resurrection Park, an open space for the community with fruit trees, wooden benches, a fountain in the middle. It became the hot spot of Clayton. Sunday afternoon, it's full of people. Children running, young couples dating, old men playing checkers, mothers talking life, pulsing in the same place that was almost swallowed by greed and lies. My studio is right there at the entrance of the school. A wide, airy space, full of light, very different from the cramped corner where I worked all my life. Hands don't have the same strength as before. Arthritis got worse with age, but I can still mold the clay, still can transform earth into art, pain into beauty, and I don't work alone anymore. I have helpers, apprentices, what I like to call my children of the heart, talented young people from Clayton and the region, some who started with me still children in the first class of the school. Today they are trained artists, with their own technique, own style, but who still like to say they are from Mrs. Sullivan's lineage. My favorite, although I never admit this out loud, is Caleb. He arrived at the school at 12, a scrawny, quiet boy, son of a single mother who worked as a housekeeper in Birmingham and only came back to Clayton once a month. Nobody knew who the father was. He had a special way with clay from the start, a natural intuition, as if his hands talked to the earth. Today, at 20, Caleb is already a teacher at the school, teaches beginner classes, continues living with me in a little room I adapted in the back of the house. He's like a grandson I never had, maybe even more than that, a son I chose to have at the end of life. They say blood is thicker than water, but Margaret's story proves that love is thicker than both. Finding Caleb wasn't just about teaching pottery, it was the universe finally giving her the child who deserved her love, right when she needed him most. "You saved me, Mrs. Sullivan," he told me once while we worked together on a big order. "Before you and the school, I had no future. I was just another kid, without a father who was going to end up in bad stuff." Those words filled my eyes with tears. If all this crazy story served to save Caleb and other young people like him, then it was worth it. Suffering wasn't in vain. Besides Caleb, I have about 10 more children of the heart I consider true family. They come to have lunch with me every Sunday, help me with tasks I can't do alone anymore, keep me company on stormy nights when loneliness squeezes. They are the family I rebuilt after losing the one blood gave me. And speaking of blood family, that's the hardest part to tell. Michael served his sentence as determined by justice. 5 years of community service plus the fine paid in installments. Lost his law license. Of course, a legal professional convicted of identity fraud and larceny couldn't continue practicing. The marriage to Jennifer also ended in the middle of the process. Gambling debts took years to be paid off. Today he lives in Montgomery, works in logistics, has his own truck, does freight across the South. He admitted his mistake, paid for what he did, tries to rebuild life. From time to time he sends a letter, a birthday card, a modest gift at Christmas. I answer with few words, without rancor, but also without the intimacy we once had. 4 years ago, he asked to visit me. After thinking a lot, I accepted. It was a difficult meeting, full of awkward silences, superficial topics to avoid touching deep wounds. He looked older than he really was, with premature wrinkles marking the face that was once so handsome, so like his father's. "You look great, Mom," he commented, trying to break the ice. "I saw your sculptures at an exhibition in Montgomery. They are impressive." "Thank you, son." I answered and noticed how he flinched hearing the word son. Maybe he didn't expect me to still call him that. Life has been generous with me, despite everything. At the end of the visit, saying goodbye, he tried to hug me. I hesitated for a moment, then let him. It was a quick hug, without much warmth, but representing a small step on the long road of reconciliation. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Mom," he said at the door, "but I want you to know I regret what I did every day. There isn't a day I don't wake up thinking about the harm I caused you. Regret is the beginning of redemption, son." I answered, quoting a phrase my father always said, "The important thing is that you move forward, living with honesty and decency. Leave the rest in God's hands." After that day, Michael started visiting Clayton every 6 months or so. He never stays more than a day, never sleeps at my house, but comes, talks, has coffee, tells how life is going. It's a civil, distant relationship, but at least it exists. It's more than many mothers have after betrayals like the one I suffered. With Chloe, the story is different. After she served her sentence and paid her part of the fine, She disappeared for good. Doesn't answer the few letters I sent. Doesn't pick up the phone. Gives no news. I heard through mutual acquaintances she went to live in Texas, works in a department store, lives with a much older man. Seems she refuses to talk about the past, family, what she did, as if erasing memory could also erase guilt. Sometimes I think of her, imagine what a reunion would be like. Would she recognize me? Would she see in me the mother who nursed her, told stories to put her to sleep, worked 3 jobs to pay for her studies? Or would she just see the old woman who ruined her plans, exposed her publicly, led her to conviction? Maybe one day she'll come back, maybe not. I've learned some wounds don't heal in the time we want. Some reconciliations don't happen in the term of our earthly life. And that's okay. Life follows its course, like the river shaping stones, not with force, but with persistence. Today I'm known in Clayton as the guardian of the town's memory. Not just for my stories, which I continue telling even with a raspier voice, but for preserving traditions, old knowledge, culture at risk of being lost in this modern world of internet and cell phones. At school, besides teaching pottery, I make a point of telling young people how Clayton was in the old days, what the parties, beliefs, habits were like, how we lived without electric light, without running water, without all these modernities that today seem indispensable. How we had fun, dated, worked, how we faced difficulties with creativity and resilience. You're like a living Google, a boy of about 10 told me once, drawing laughs from the class. I laughed too, even though I usually leave that internet stuff to the young folks. Caleb later explained I was better than the website because my stories had a heartbeat. I found it funny. If that's so, then I really am a clay Google, full of stories and knowledge no machine can store, because it comes from lived life, not books or computers. In recent years, I've received many researchers, historians, anthropologists, sociologists, educated folks coming from far away to hear my stories, document my work, record my knowledge about clay and life. They record, film, photograph, note everything down. They say they are preserving intangible cultural heritage. Pretty words to say they don't want my stories to die with me when it's my time to go. One of these researchers, a nice young man from the University of Alabama, asked me a question that caught me by surprise. "Mrs. Sullivan, have you forgiven your children for what they did?" I stayed silent for a while, stirring the coffee that had already gone cold in the cup, searching deep in my soul for an honest answer. "You know, son," I answered finally, "there is a difference between forgiving and forgetting. Forgiving is taking the weight of rancor off the heart. It's not wishing harm. It's recognizing everyone makes mistakes and deserves a second chance. Forgetting is erasing from memory. It's pretending it never happened. It's leaving the wound without a scar. I forgave, yes, but I don't forget, and I don't want to forget. Forgetting is dangerous, because whoever forgets the past risks repeating the same mistakes." The young man wrote down my words carefully, as if they were precious. Maybe they are. Maybe that's the biggest lesson I learned in all these years. Forgiveness isn't amnesia. Forgiveness is choosing to move forward, even carrying the scars. And that is the hardest lesson I ever learned. Sugar. If you agree that we women get stronger with every scar, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Let's show the world that we don't break. We just get molded into something new. Another important lesson was about strength. When I was younger, I thought being strong was not crying, not showing weakness, enduring everything silently. Today I know true strength lies in accepting vulnerability, crying when needed, asking for help when necessary, recognizing one's own limits. It was when I accepted my fragility that I discovered my greatest strength. It's funny how life turns around. The betrayal that should have destroyed me ended up rebuilding me. Without that terrible pain, maybe I never would have discovered the artist inside me. Maybe I never would have met the children of the heart who light up my days today. Maybe I never would have created the school that changed the lives of so many young people in Clayton. This doesn't mean I'm thankful for the suffering. What foolishness would that be? But I recognize that, like clay needs to pass through fire to gain resistance, we humans too often need the hardest trials to discover our true essence. On my 80th birthday, the town of Clayton threw a party I'll never forget. They closed the main square, set up a stage, invited musicians, organized an exhibition of my works. The mayor gave a speech, presented a beautiful plaque, declared that day as the Day of Culture and Resilience in the town's official calendar. I was embarrassed by so much attention. Me, who always lived a simple life, of quiet work, but I understood that homage wasn't just for me, Margaret. It was for the history I represent, for the values I defend, for the culture I help preserve. At the end of the party, when I was already tired of so many handshakes and hugs, Caleb helped me up on stage to say a few words. I looked at that crowd, townspeople, outsiders, people I didn't even know, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. So, I took a deep breath, let my heart speak. I am just a woman of clay. I started, raspy voice amplified by the microphone. I was born on this land. I grew up molding clay, and one day I will return to be the clay I always was. But while I am here, I want to leave a message for you, especially for the young people. Never let anyone bury you alive, be it family, friends, partners, bosses, politicians. No one has the right to diminish who you are, erase your dreams, deny your value. If they try, do as I did. Resurrect, come back from the grave they dug for you, and show you are more alive than ever. The crowd gave a standing ovation. I saw tears on many faces, smiles on others, heads nodding in agreement. Maybe that is my greatest contribution to the world. Not the award-winning sculptures, not the recognized school, but the simple message that it is never too late to be reborn, to start over, to reinvent oneself. Today, at 84, I live each day with gratitude. Health isn't the best anymore. Legs hurt. Blood pressure sometimes goes up. Memory fails on small things. But the joy of living is intact, as is the will to wake up every morning to see what the new day brings. I don't know how much time I still have in this world. Could be years, could be months, could be days. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I lived fully, that I will leave a legacy when I go, that I transformed the greatest pain of my life into something that benefits so many people. If I could go back in time and avoid all that tragedy, would I avoid it? It's a difficult question. I would avoid the suffering, of course, but I wouldn't give up the lessons, discoveries, transformations that came after. Maybe the answer is that we shouldn't aim for a life without pain, but a life where pains strengthen us instead of breaking us. The sun is already setting in Clayton, painting the sky orange and pink. From the porch of my house here, I can see Resurrection Park, full of people enjoying the late afternoon. Children running, elderly talking, young people exchanging loving glances. Life in its eternal cycle of birth, growth, death, and rebirth. Tomorrow I will wake up early, as I always did. I will drink my strong coffee, feed the birds visiting my backyard, go to the studio to prepare clay for another day of work. Caleb and the other children of the heart will arrive soon after, bringing laughter, stories, young energy that renews my spirit. And so we continue, me and the clay, molding each other, finding beauty in imperfections, strength in fragilities, new life where there seemed to be only defeat, because in the end, we are all clay in the hands of time, of fate, of each other. In the end, human life is just like this lump of clay on the wheel. If it isn't kneaded with pain, if it isn't fired in the brutal kiln of betrayal, how can it ever become a strong, beautiful masterpiece? That ordeal years ago stripped away my naivety about a mother's love, but in return, it gave me a brilliant new life I never dared to dream of. But I have to be honest with you some nights. I still lie awake and wonder, was sending my own children to prison too cruel? Or was it a necessary lesson to make them decent human beings? I really want to hear what you think. If you were in my shoes standing in the middle of that church that day, what would you have done? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with the strong women in your life. And don't click away just yet. Right on your screen now is another equally shocking story about a grandmother who had to stand up to protect her honor against her entire family line. Click on that right now, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening.